Hello, my dear listeners. Today I want to begin by sending a warm hug to Sandra Caesar from Oklahoma, Cynthia Roses from Palm Coast, Florida, and Eleanor Stepanek from Western Massachusetts. It's such a joy to have you here. And what about you? Where are you listening from right now? Leave a comment below. I love finding out where each of these beautiful hearts tuning in comes from. And who knows? Maybe I'll mention your name in the next video too. Now then, let's begin today's story. The envelope was a weapon in her hands. Heavy, cream-colored cardstock, its edges sharp enough to cut. Ella Carter stood in the cramped hallway of her mother's apartment, staring at the elegant, looping calligraphy that spelled out her name. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons, a deliberate act of cruelty disguised in pristine white. Her fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. Inside the wedding invitation was a masterpiece of understated elegance, announcing the union of Jack Thompson and his new, appropriate fiancée. Tucked behind it was a smaller, personal note, the handwriting instantly recognizable, each curve of the letters a ghost of a love she once thought was hers. It's important to us that you see we've moved on. Hope you can make it. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. The casual cruelty of the words, the feigned civility, was a fresh twist of the knife in a wound that was still raw. Moved on. 2 months ago, Jack had stood in this very hallway, ending their 3-year engagement with a phrase that had echoed in her mind ever since. "You're just not enough for where my life is going, Ella." He had shattered her heart, dismantled her future, and left her to pick up the pieces. She had retreated to the familiar, slightly suffocating comfort of her mother's home and taken a job at a downtown cafe, a temporary port in the storm of her life, a way to feel useful, to simply get through the day. This invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a public declaration of her inadequacy, a command performance for her own humiliation. The next day at work was a blur of forced smiles and the scent of burnt espresso. The cafe was a whirlwind of noise and motion, but Ella moved through it in a fog of her own misery. The words from the note were on a loop in her head, each repetition chipping away at her already fragile composure. She was balancing a tray, her eyes stinging with unshed tears, when she turned too quickly. The world tilted. A full cup of hot, black coffee flew from her tray, arcing through the air in a slow-motion disaster, before splashing directly onto the crisp, white shirt of a customer. A collective gasp went through the immediate area. Mortification, hot and absolute, washed over her. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she stammered, grabbing a fistful of napkins and dabbing uselessly at the dark, spreading stain. She finally looked up, bracing for the inevitable anger, and met the eyes of the customer. It was him. The quiet man who came in every morning at precisely 8:15, ordered a large black coffee, and sat in the corner booth reading financial reports on a tablet. He had a presence that was both intense and unobtrusive, an aura of calm authority. He wasn't angry. His expression was one of startling, unexpected kindness. He looked from the ruin of his shirt to her panicked, tear-streaked face. "It looks like you're having a difficult day," he said, his voice a low, calm baritone that cut through the cafe's clatter. The simple, gentle observation, so different from the anger she expected, broke something in her. "You have no idea," she replied, her voice choked with a sob she couldn't hold back. He considered her for a moment, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "How about you tell me about it after your shift?" he suggested, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Consider it payment for my stained shirt." The proposal, so strange and yet so gentle, caught her completely off guard. A stranger was offering to listen. And Ella, desperate for any distraction from the echo of her own heartbreak, found herself nodding before she could even think. The autumn air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint, earthy scent of fallen leaves. They walked in silence through the park, the city's frantic energy muted by the rustling trees and the soft glow of the old-fashioned lampposts. Ella had expected the silence to be awkward, a tense void she would feel compelled to fill. Instead, it was contemplative, a shared space of quiet that felt surprisingly comfortable. His presence was a steady, calming anchor in the turbulent sea of her emotions. He led them to a secluded bench overlooking a small, still pond, the water a dark mirror reflecting the twilight sky. He sat, leaving a respectful distance between them, and waited. He didn't press, didn't pry. He simply offered her the silence, a blank canvas for her to paint her story on. And so, feeling an inexplicable sense of safety with this calm, kind stranger, she did. The words tumbled out of her, a torrent of heartbreak and humiliation she had kept bottled up for weeks. She told him about Jack, about their 3 years together, about the future she had so carefully built in her mind. She told him about the brutal, dismissive way he had ended it, and the final, crushing blow of the wedding invitation. When she finished, her voice was a raw whisper, her story hanging in the cold air between them. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and half expected him to offer a few polite, meaningless platitudes before making a hasty retreat. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dark water. "The pressure to be enough for someone else's ambition," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "It's a suffocating weight." To her astonishment, he began to speak. He didn't share details, but he painted a picture of his own gilded cage. He spoke of the crushing expectations of a family empire, of a life mapped out for him since birth. He talked about the constant, exhausting pressure to merge his life and his company with another powerful family, a strategic alliance that was being disguised as a marriage to an heiress he barely knew and cared for even less. "So, we're both trapped," she observed, a sense of wonder in her voice. The chasm between their worlds, her life of bussing tables, his of billion-dollar deals, seemed to vanish in that moment of shared confinement. Stuck in situations we don't want. A heavy silence fell between them again. But this time, it was different. It was charged with a new, shared understanding. Then he turned to face her fully, the dim lamplight catching a sudden, dangerous spark in his eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated mischief, a startling contrast to his previously composed demeanor. "What if," he began, the idea seeming to form on his lips in real time, a reckless, brilliant thought taking flight. "What if we got married?" Ella stared at him, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're joking, right?" "I'm completely serious," he said, his voice dropping, leaning closer. The playful glint in his eyes intensified. "Think about it, Ella. Just picture the scene, the wedding. Your ex-fiancé standing there, smug and triumphant, waiting for you to arrive so he can savor his final victory." He paused, letting the image form in her mind. "And then you walk in," he continued, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Not alone, not defeated, but radiant, confident, and married. To me." He leaned back slightly. "And as a bonus, I get to walk into my own family's tribunal and regretfully inform them that their merger plans are off the table, because unfortunately, I'm already a taken man." The proposal was insane. It was impulsive, reckless, and utterly ludicrous. But the image he painted, the look on Jack's face, the delicious poetic justice of it all, was an irresistible, intoxicating temptation. It was a fantasy so potent, so perfect, it made her heart beat faster with something that wasn't pain, but a wild, forgotten flicker of hope. The next day, the fluorescent lights of the city clerk's office felt harsh and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the soft, dreamy glow of the park lamps the night before. The air smelled of old paper and stale bureaucracy. This was the cold, hard reality of their impulsive, moonlit pact. They stood side by side, two strangers about to commit one of the most intimate acts of life, for the most impersonal of reasons. The gravity of the moment settled over them, a heavy, sobering blanket. Brandon turned to her, the playful, mischievous glint from the previous night completely gone. His expression was serious, his eyes searching hers. "There's still time to back out, Ella," he said, his voice low and steady. "No one would blame you. This is insane." His offer was a lifeline, a chance to retreat to the safety of her predictable, painful reality. But the image of Jack's smug face flashed in her mind, followed by the memory of Brandon's own quiet desperation. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about them, two trapped people creating their own escape hatch. A new, unfamiliar fire of determination ignited in her chest. "And let Jack win?" she replied, her voice stronger and clearer than it had been in months. "Not a chance." A slow smile spread across Brandon's face, reaching his eyes and erasing the last of his doubt. "All right then." The ceremony, if it could be called that, was brutally efficient. They stood before a bored-looking clerk, who recited the legal necessities in a monotone drone. They answered "I do" to questions that felt monumental and absurd. They signed their names on a crisp, legal document. It was quick, impersonal, and irrevocably binding. When the clerk pronounced them married, there was no kiss. Instead, Brandon turned to her and extended his hand. She took it. Their handshake was firm, the grip of co-conspirators sealing a pact. A shared, secret smile passed between them, the giddy, nervous smile of two children who had just done something thrillingly, terrifyingly adult. They were husband and wife. As they stepped out of the drab building and back into the bright, bustling city, the world felt different, tilted on its axis. "Wait," he said, stopping her on the steps. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dark velvet box. "For the performance," he explained, his voice a little rough. He opened it. Inside, a simple, elegant platinum band rested against the dark fabric. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was timeless, its beauty in its simplicity. He took her left hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the cool metal brushing against her skin, a jolt, a sudden, unexpected flutter, went through her. It felt like a spark in the dark. The ring settled into place, its weight both a comfort and a shock. They both stared at it for a moment. Then their eyes met. The shared smile was gone, replaced by a look of mutual, dawning awareness. The abstract nature of their pact had just become a tangible, intimate reality. This was real. "So, Mrs. Prescott," he said, the name sounding strange and new on his tongue as he tested it out. He cleared his throat, a flicker of that mischievous light returning to his eyes. "Ready for our first challenge as a married couple?" "What's that?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. "Shopping," he replied, a broad, genuine grin breaking across his face. "We're going to buy a dress that will make your ex-fiancé regret the day he was born." Brandon led her to a part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. The streets were lined with discreet, elegant storefronts bearing the names of world-renowned designers. He stopped in front of a boutique with no clothes in the window, just a single, artfully arranged orchid in a vase. The name on the door was whispered in circles of the ultra-wealthy. "I'm not sure I belong in a place like this," Ella murmured, her confidence faltering as a doorman in a crisp uniform held the heavy glass door open for them. "Nonsense," Brandon said, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, a gesture that was both reassuring and proprietary. "You're Mrs. Prescott now. You belong wherever you want." The inside of the boutique was a serene, minimalist haven of soft lighting, plush carpets, and racks of clothing that were more like works of art. A chic, impeccably dressed woman, the stylist, approached them immediately, her eyes lighting up with recognition as she saw Brandon. "Brandon, darling, what a surprise," she cooed before her professional gaze landed on Ella, taking in her simple jeans and sweater with a swift, practiced eye. "Celeste," Brandon greeted her warmly. "My wife Ella needs a dress, something for a wedding, something unforgettable." The word wife hung in the air, and Celeste's perfectly composed expression flickered with surprise before she recovered. "Of course, for your wife. It will be my pleasure." For the next hour, Ella was swept into a whirlwind of silk, satin, and lace. She felt like an imposter, a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. The first few dresses were beautiful but felt like costumes. A pale blue gown made her feel washed out. A black one felt too severe. Brandon sat in a plush armchair in the corner, not with the bored impatience she might have expected, but with a quiet, focused attention that made her skin prickle. He would look up from his phone each time she emerged, his gaze analytical, offering a simple nod or a slight shake of his head. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was a director, searching for the perfect costume for their leading lady. "I have one more," Celeste said, her eyes gleaming. "It's bold, but I have a feeling." She returned with a dress the color of a deep, rich ruby. It was simple in its design, with clean lines and a cut that was both elegant and daring. As Ella slipped it on in the dressing room, the fabric felt like a second skin. She turned to face the mirror, and the breath caught in her throat. The woman staring back at her was not the heartbroken girl who served coffee. This woman was powerful, confident. Her posture was straighter, her chin higher. The dress didn't just hang on her. It seemed to emanate a light of its own, turning her quiet resilience into a visible, smoldering strength. She was, for the first time in a long time, breathtaking. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the dressing room. Brandon was looking down at his phone, scrolling through an email. "Celeste, I'm not sure," he began. Then he looked up. The words died in his throat. His phone slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud on the plush carpet. His jaw, usually set in a firm, controlled line, went slack. His eyes, sharp and analytical, were now wide with an unguarded, visceral awe. In that moment, he wasn't seeing a business partner. He wasn't seeing the quiet girl from the cafe. He was seeing a woman. The woman. The most stunningly beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes on. A slow, hot blush crept up Ella's neck at the raw, undisguised admiration in his gaze. The air between them crackled, thick with an energy that had nothing to do with their pact and everything to do with the undeniable magnetic pull between a man and a woman. "That's the one," he said, his voice a low, hoarse rasp he didn't seem to recognize as his own. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but his eyes never left her. "We'll take it." The performance was supposed to start at the wedding. But standing there, under the soft lights of the boutique, with his gaze on her like a physical touch, Ella realized with a terrifying thrill that it had already begun. The day of the wedding arrived, a knot of nervous, excited energy tightening in Ella's stomach. The venue was an opulent country club, its grand entrance swarming with photographers and elegantly dressed guests. It was the heart of the world she had once desperately wanted to belong to, a world that had ultimately rejected her. A sleek, black car, so silent it seemed to glide rather than drive, pulled up to the curb, immediately drawing the attention of the press. The car was a statement of quiet, immense power, and it was not one they recognized. The driver's side door opened, and a valet rushed forward, but the man who emerged waved him off. He was tall, his posture exuding an effortless confidence. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit that spoke of quiet luxury, not flashy wealth. A low murmur rippled through the photographers as they recognized him. Brandon Prescott. One of the country's most elusive and influential billionaires, a man who was notoriously private and rarely seen at such public social events. What was he doing here? Brandon ignored the flurry of camera flashes and the shouted questions. He walked around the car, his movements unhurried, and opened the passenger door. He extended his hand into the car's interior. A moment later, a slender hand, adorned with a simple, elegant platinum band, took his. Ella emerged from the car. If Brandon's arrival had caused a murmur, hers caused a collective, sharp intake of breath. She was a vision in crimson. The red dress was a slash of vibrant, defiant color against the muted pastels of the other guests. It clung to her figure, a testament to the newfound confidence she felt radiating from within. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup subtle yet striking. She was not the heartbroken girl they might have expected to see, crawling back to witness her ex's triumph. She was a phoenix, risen from the ashes, and she was glorious. She took Brandon's offered hand, her fingers lacing with his, the simple public gesture of intimacy, the glint of the matching rings on their fingers, sent a clear, unambiguous message. They walked toward the grand entrance, a united front of quiet power and stunning beauty. The crowd of guests parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and undisguised admiration. Every eye in the place was on them. Inside, at the head of the receiving line, stood Jack and his new bride. They were greeting guests, their smiles wide and practiced, the very picture of a triumphant couple. Jack's gaze swept over the room, and then he saw them. He froze. The practiced smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. His eyes widened. His jaw went slack. He stared at Ella as if he were seeing a ghost, a beautiful, vengeful ghost in a killer red dress. His gaze darted from her radiant face to the man whose hand she was holding, a man who radiated a level of power and influence Jack could only dream of. Then his eyes fell to their intertwined hands, to the brilliant platinum band on her finger. The shock curdled into a dark, incredulous fury. "Ella?" Jack stammered, his voice a strangled croak as they approached, his bride forgotten at his side. "What? What are you doing here? And who is he?" Brandon smiled. A cool, razor-sharp smile that didn't reach his eyes. He pulled Ella a fraction closer, his thumb stroking the back of her hand in a gesture of casual possession. "I'm her husband," he said, his voice calm and clear, yet carrying the weight of a thunderclap that echoed through the suddenly silent hall. "And we just came to wish the happy couple all the best." The news detonated in the opulent ballroom, spreading through the crowd with the speed of a wildfire. Ella Carter, the jilted ex, married to Brandon Prescott? The gossip was a delicious, intoxicating scandal that instantly became the main event. Ella and Brandon were the new center of the universe, their quiet, magnetic presence completely eclipsing the bride and groom. Every whispered conversation, every curious glance was directed at them. They moved through the room with a practiced ease, Brandon's hand a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. He navigated the sea of staring faces as if he were born to it, introducing Ella with a simple, proud, "This is my wife, Ella," that left no room for questions. Jack, however, would not be deterred. His face was a thunderous mask of fury and wounded pride. He watched them from across the room, his eyes burning holes into them, until he could stand it no longer. He abandoned his post, leaving his bewildered bride, and stalked toward them, intercepting them near the champagne bar. "What kind of game is this, Ella?" he hissed, his voice low and venomous, his attempt at a smile a grotesque grimace. "Couldn't handle being alone, so you went out and rented an escort for the evening?" The insult was designed to cut, to remind her of her perceived station compared to his new, elevated one. Ella flinched, the cruelty of his words hitting their mark. She opened her mouth to retort, a defensive, angry response bubbling up. But before she could utter a sound, Brandon moved. It was a subtle shift, not aggressive, but definitive. He stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her from Jack's toxic glare. It wasn't the move of a possessive man claiming his property. It was the move of a protector, a partner. He turned his head to look at Jack, a look of mild, almost bored amusement on his face. "I think you're confusing couldn't handle being alone with upgraded," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous purr. The insult was delivered with such surgical precision that it took a moment to land. Without waiting for a response, Brandon turned his back on Jack, dismissing him as completely irrelevant. He signaled to the bartender. "2 glasses of your best champagne," he ordered, his voice returning to its normal, calm tone. "My wife and I are celebrating." He took the 2 flutes from the bartender, handing one to Ella. He clinked his glass against hers, his eyes sparkling with a private, shared victory. "To new beginnings," he said, his voice for her ears only. They both took a sip, completely ignoring Jack, who was left standing there, sputtering, his face turning a shade of mottled red. The public humiliation was absolute. Jack, the triumphant groom, had been rendered utterly insignificant at his own wedding. Defeated and speechless, he turned and stormed away. The moment he was gone, a bubble of laughter escaped Ella's lips. It was a real, genuine, cathartic laugh. Brandon joined her, his own laughter a low, warm rumble. She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of shock and immense gratitude. He hadn't just defended her, he had elevated her. With a few well-chosen words, he had reframed the entire narrative, turning her perceived weakness into an undeniable strength. In that moment, sharing a laugh over their vanquished foe, they weren't just co-conspirators. They felt like partners. As their shared laughter subsided, the band on the stage shifted gears, the upbeat music melting into a slow, romantic melody. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and couples began to drift toward the dance floor, moving together in a practiced, graceful rhythm. Brandon turned to Ella, the last traces of his smile softening into something else, something warmer and more sincere. He offered her a slight formal bow, a courtly gesture that was both playful and deeply respectful. "Would you grant me the honor of this dance, Mrs. Prescott?" he asked, the title on his lips now sounding less like a part of the act and more like a term of endearment. The mischievous glint was back in his eyes, but it was tempered by a new, gentler light. "I would love to," she replied, her voice a little breathless. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, and led her onto the dance floor. He drew her close, one hand resting firmly on her waist, the other holding hers. The world, with its hundreds of curious, staring eyes, seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a private, intimate bubble. Nestled in his arms, her head resting lightly against his shoulder, Ella felt a profound sense of safety she hadn't realized she was missing. The solid strength of his frame, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the simple, secure way he held her. It was an anchor in the storm of the evening. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled by the fabric of his suit jacket. "For what?" he murmured back, his lips close to her hair. "For today," she said, lifting her head to look at him. "For everything. You didn't have to do that. With Jack." He looked down at her, his expression serious now, the playful light in his eyes replaced by a deep, unwavering sincerity. "Don't thank me, Ella," he said, his voice low and firm. "I'm having more fun than I've had in a very long time." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And I don't like seeing good people get treated badly." They danced in a comfortable silence after that, the need for words dissolving. The performance was over. They were no longer two strangers playing a part. They were a man and a woman, moving as one to the music, connected by an unexpected and powerful current of camaraderie and a spark of something more. She wasn't thinking about Jack or the humiliation that had brought her here. She was only aware of Brandon, the strength of his hand, the warmth of his body, the steady, reassuring beat of his heart against hers. The song eventually came to an end, the final notes fading into the air. But they lingered for a moment, reluctant to break the spell, their bodies still close, their eyes locked. From across the room, Jack watched them, his face a dark mask of jealousy and regret. Ella's revenge had been a spectacular success, but as she stood there lost in Brandon's gaze, she was struck by a sudden, terrifying realization. The triumphant, satisfying feeling of putting Jack in his place was already fading, and the feeling that was replacing it, this warm, fluttering, dangerous feeling she felt for the man holding her, had absolutely nothing to do with revenge at all. The final notes of the song served as a reluctant alarm, pulling them back to the reality of the glittering, gossip-filled ballroom. They stepped apart, the invisible thread of intimacy stretching but not breaking between them. Brandon glanced around the room, his expression once again cool and strategic. "I believe our mission here is accomplished," he said, his voice a low murmur for her ears only. "We've made our point. Any longer, and it becomes gloating." Ella nodded, a small, secret smile playing on her lips. He was right. They had arrived, they had conquered, and now it was time for a graceful exit, leaving the chaos and speculation to fester in their wake. They moved through the crowd with purpose, a unified force. They found the bride's parents, the actual hosts of the event, and offered their polite, formal farewells. "Thank you so much for having us," Brandon said smoothly, his hand resting on Ella's back. "It was a beautiful ceremony. We wish them a lifetime of happiness." The words were delivered with such flawless sincerity that the bride's mother, flustered and starstruck by the billionaire's presence, could only stammer her thanks. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a trail of whispers and turned heads, a story that would be told and retold for weeks. The cool night air was a welcome relief, washing over them as they waited for the valet to bring the car. The moment the doors of the Bentley closed, sealing them in its silent, leather-scented interior, the adrenaline of the evening began to recede. The shared tension, the thrill of the performance, the high of their victory, it all dissipated, leaving a quiet, charged intimacy in its place. Ella leaned her head back against the soft leather seat and let out a long, slow breath. A genuine, bubbling laugh escaped her lips. "I can't believe we did that." "It was, I have to admit, incredibly satisfying," Brandon replied, a rare, unguarded grin spreading across his face as he started the car and pulled away from the curb. They drove in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, the city lights sliding past the windows. The us against the world feeling of the evening still lingered, a warm, pleasant hum between them. "So," Ella said, turning in her seat to look at him, a playful glint in her eye. "Where to now? Husband?" She tested the word, letting it roll off her tongue, half joking, half curious. He glanced at her, and in the fleeting glow of a passing streetlight, she saw his smile fade. His expression became serious, the weight of the second half of their pact settling over him. "Home," he said, his voice losing its light, easy tone. "And then tomorrow, we prepare for our second challenge." He paused, his gaze returning to the road ahead. "Presenting my wife to my family." The word wife, which had sounded so proud and definitive in the ballroom, now sounded like a battle cry. The reality of their situation crashed back down on them. The first part of their agreement, the part born of vengeance and spectacle, was over. Now came the hard part, the part that wasn't a game, convincing the powerful, formidable Prescott family that their marriage was anything but a lie. If the country club for Jack's wedding was a display of new money, the Prescott family estate was a monument to old, unshakable power. The mansion, a sprawling stone edifice set on acres of manicured, frost-covered grounds, didn't just suggest wealth, it radiated an intimidating, almost feudal authority. They were not greeted at the door. They were led by a silent staff member into a formal drawing room where Brandon's parents were waiting. They sat in high-backed chairs like monarchs holding court, the air thick with their cold, silent disapproval. A wedding? Brandon's father, a man with a severe face and eyes that seemed to calculate a person's worth in an instant, spoke first. His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "Without consulting us?" "And with her?" his mother added, her gaze sweeping over Ella with a dismissive chill that was far more insulting than any outright venom. She looked at Ella not as a person, but as a strategic miscalculation, an unfortunate complication. "Brandon, you had an arrangement, an understanding with the Beaumont family. This little stunt has caused significant disruption." Brandon stood tall, his posture relaxed, but his presence unyielding. He was not the dutiful son here. He was a rival power. "My marriage was not, and will never be, a negotiation," he stated, his voice calm but with an edge of steel. "Ella is my wife. That is the end of the discussion." He took Ella's hand, his fingers lacing through hers in a gesture of unwavering solidarity. "We'll be staying in my old rooms tonight." The declaration, the casual assumption that they would be sharing a room under his parents' roof, was a clear, deliberate act of defiance. Later, in the vast, beautifully appointed suite that had been his childhood bedroom, the tension of the confrontation finally dissipated, only to be replaced by a new, more intimate strain. The room was dominated by a massive king-sized bed, a silent, imposing centerpiece to their charade. "I'll take the sofa," Brandon said immediately, gesturing toward a plush velvet settee in the corner. It was the honorable thing to say, the only logical solution. But Ella's mind was racing, thinking 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about their comfort. It was about the performance. "And what happens if your mother, or a maid, comes in with coffee in the morning?" she countered, thinking aloud. "They'll see you on the sofa and know something is wrong." The whole point is to convince them this is real. She took a breath, her heart beginning to beat a little faster at her own audacity. It would be more convincing if we shared the bed. She saw the surprise in his eyes and quickly added, each on our own side, of course, strictly for appearances. Her logic was flawless, a perfect strategic move in their shared game. But the practical suggestion hung in the air between them, charged with a sudden, nervous energy. The thought of lying next to him all night, separated by only a few feet of mattress, made her pulse quicken with a feeling that was equal parts apprehension and a thrilling, forbidden anticipation. The night was a unique and exquisite form of torture. Lying rigidly on her side of the enormous bed, Ella was painfully aware of every breath Brandon took, every slight shift of his weight on the mattress. The space between them felt both as wide as an ocean and as thin as a sheet of paper. Sleep was a distant, unattainable luxury. She feigned it, her breathing slow and even, her body perfectly still. But her mind was a whirlwind of sensation. The scent of his clean, masculine soap, the warmth radiating from his body across the cool sheets, the sheer, undeniable presence of him beside her. At some point in the deep, pre-dawn hours, exhaustion finally claimed them both. Ella woke slowly, drifting up from a deep sleep into a state of profound, unfamiliar comfort. She was warm. She felt safe. A heavy, steady weight was draped over her waist, and a soft, rhythmic puff of air stirred her hair. Her cheek was pillowed against something firm yet yielding, something that rose and fell with a slow, steady beat. Her eyes fluttered open. Her heart stopped. She was curled against Brandon's side, her head resting on his chest, his arm wrapped securely around her. In sleep, they had unconsciously sought each other out, their bodies finding a natural, easy intimacy that their waking minds had so carefully avoided. She didn't move, terrified of breaking the spell. He looked so different in the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. The sharp, controlled lines of his face were softened, the mask of the billionaire CEO completely gone. He looked younger, more vulnerable, his expression peaceful. On a pure, unthinking impulse, she lifted her hand and traced the line of his jaw with the tip of her finger. The touch was feather-light, a ghost of a caress. It was enough. His eyes opened. They were inches from hers, still hazy with sleep, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, the world suspended. There was no strategy, no pretense, just the raw, unguarded connection of two people waking up in each other's arms. Then, reality crashed down on them both at the same instant. They recoiled as if burned, scrambling to their respective sides of the bed, a chasm of mattress suddenly reappearing between them. The warmth was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward chill. "Sorry," they mumbled in unison, neither daring to look at the other. They got ready for the day in a clumsy, flustered silence. The memory of the embrace, the feeling of his heart beating against her cheek, a vibrant, unspoken secret thrumming between them. Downstairs, the atmosphere at the breakfast table was just as frosty as the day before. Brandon's mother immediately began a subtle interrogation, her questions about Ella's background and family designed to highlight her unsuitability. Ella was bracing herself for another battle when an unexpected ally emerged. Brandon's younger sister, a bright, sharp-eyed woman named Chloe, who had been watching them with an amused expression, finally intervened. She had seen them coming down the stairs together, their faces flushed, their inability to look at each other a clear tell. "Oh, Mother, do stop," Chloe said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Leave the newlyweds alone." She took a sip of her orange juice, her eyes twinkling as she looked from Brandon to Ella. From the looks of it, they don't seem to need any help getting along. The suggestive comment, and the clear implication behind it, landed like a small, perfectly aimed bomb. Brandon's mother was struck silent. Ella and Brandon both turned a shade of crimson, their shared embarrassment a more convincing performance of newlywed intimacy than anything they could have possibly faked. The moment the heavy oak doors of the Prescott estate closed behind them, it was as if a massive invisible weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The drive back to Brandon's penthouse in New York was the complete opposite of their tense, silent journey from Jack's wedding. The shared ordeal, the unexpected alliance with Chloe, and the lingering electric memory of the morning had forged a new, more comfortable intimacy between them. Back in the vast, minimalist penthouse, the silence no longer felt awkward or charged with unspoken rules. It felt peaceful. "I don't think I can handle another 5-course meal with a side of passive aggression," Ella said, kicking off her shoes and sinking into the plush sofa. "I was thinking the same thing," Brandon replied, loosening his tie with a sigh of relief. He looked at her, a genuine, easy smile on his face. "Pizza? Pizza sounds like heaven," she laughed. They ordered from a small, unassuming place in Greenwich Village, and when it arrived, they didn't bother with plates or the massive dining table. They sat on the floor of the cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling like a fallen constellation outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and ate straight from the box. Surrounded by the trappings of immense wealth, they shared the simple, universal pleasure of a good pizza, and they talked. For the first time, they truly talked, not as strategic partners, but as two people genuinely curious about each other. He asked her about her dreams, and she found herself telling him about her passion for architecture and design, about how she filled notebooks with sketches of houses she longed to build. Homes filled with light and warmth, the kind of homes she never had growing up. He listened with a focused intensity, asking smart, insightful questions, seeing the architect she was, not the waitress she had been. She, in turn, asked him about the man behind the billion-dollar empire. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of his position, the constant pressure to be a Prescott first and a person second. He confessed that their chaotic, ridiculous weekend was the most alive, the most real he had felt in years. The hours melted away. The easy conversation, the shared laughter, the comfortable silence that fell between them. It all wove a delicate, intimate tapestry around them. In a lull in the conversation, their eyes met across the empty pizza box. The playful camaraderie, the deep conversation, the lingering memory of waking up in his arms. It all coalesced into a single, undeniable force. The air grew thick, charged with an attraction that was now impossible to ignore. He shifted closer, the movement slow, deliberate. He reached out, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. And then he hesitated, his eyes flickering back to hers. The internal battle was clear on his face. "Ella," he whispered, his voice a rough, strained sound. This isn't part of the deal." She looked at him, at the man who had defended her, respected her, and seen her in a way no one else ever had. She thought of the cold, empty life waiting for her when this was all over, and she made a choice. "Maybe," she whispered back, her voice barely audible, her heart hammering against her ribs. "We should renegotiate the deal." That was all the permission he needed. The kiss that followed was not the hesitant, questioning touch of their first dance. It was explosive. It was a release of all the pent-up tension, the unspoken attraction, the burgeoning feelings they had both been so desperately trying to suppress. It was the taste of pizza and expensive wine, the feeling of coming home to a place you'd never been before. It was the moment their marriage of convenience became inconveniently, terrifyingly, wonderfully real. Waking up was a slow, gentle drift into awareness. The first thing Ella registered was the light, a soft, hazy morning sun filtering through the massive windows. The second was the warmth. A steady, comforting heat enveloped her, a stark contrast to the memory of waking up alone in her small childhood bed. She opened her eyes. Brandon was beside her, still asleep, his arm draped loosely over her waist. His face, so often a mask of controlled intensity, was relaxed and peaceful. In the quiet intimacy of the morning, he was just a man, not a myth or a mogul. The sight filled her with a feeling so warm and tender it almost hurt. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, a slow, sleepy smile spreading across his face. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, and it made her heart do a little flip. "Morning, Mrs. Prescott," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Morning." she whispered back, a blush creeping up her cheeks. The morning after awkwardness was there, a slight, hesitant energy as they navigated this new, undefined territory. But it wasn't the tense, flustered silence of his parents' house. This was different. It was the sweet, shy awkwardness of two people who had just crossed a significant, wonderful line and weren't quite sure what the rules were on the other side. They moved to the kitchen, acting for the first time like a real couple. He made coffee, strong and black, just the way he liked it, while she found a pan and started making scrambled eggs, a simple domestic act that felt both completely foreign and perfectly natural. They sat at the sleek marble island, reading the news on their respective tablets, the comfortable silence punctuated by the clink of forks and the occasional shared comment. For a few blissful hours they existed in a perfect domestic bubble. They weren't a billionaire and a waitress caught in a fake marriage. They were just Ella and Brandon, a man and a woman starting their day, and possibly their lives together. The bubble burst with the shrill, intrusive ring of Brandon's phone. He glanced at the caller ID, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he answered, his voice shifting back into its familiar, authoritative tone. "Father." Ella watched as the easygoing man from moments before was replaced by the formidable CEO. His posture straightened, his expression became guarded. He listened for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He stood up and walked toward the window, turning his back to her as if to shield her from the conversation. "Their feelings are not my primary concern," he said into the phone, his voice sharp. "The arrangement was conditional on a marriage which did not happen. No, I will not apologize for a decision I was forced to make." He paused, listening. "Fine. I'll be there." He ended the call with a sharp tap on the screen and stood there for a long moment, staring out at the city, his back a rigid wall of tension. "What is it?" Ella asked softly. He turned to face her, and the man from the breakfast table was gone. In his place was the Prescott heir, his face a mask of grim resolve. "That was my father," he said, his voice flat. "My rebellious act, as he calls it, has consequences. The Beaumont family, the family of the heiress I was supposed to marry, feels disrespected. They're demanding a meeting. He wants me to fix it." The cold, hard reality of his world, a world of strategic alliances and powerful, unforgiving families, had just smashed through their fragile, happy bubble. Their marriage, which had begun as a clever solution to their individual problems, had just become the source of a much larger, more dangerous one. The air in the boardroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was a sterile, intimidating space of dark wood and smoked glass, designed to make people feel small. On one side of the massive table sat the Beaumont family and their team of stone-faced lawyers. On the other sat Brandon's father, his expression a thunderous mask of disapproval. They were two powerful dynasties, united in their indignation. The door opened, and Brandon walked in. He was the picture of calm, unshakable authority, but he was not alone. At his side, her head held high, was Ella. A low murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Brandon's father shot him a look of pure fury. This was supposed to be a private meeting, a place for him to clean up his mess, not to flaunt it. "Brandon, what is the meaning of this?" his father demanded, his voice a low growl. "The meaning is simple," Brandon replied, his voice cool and clear as he pulled out a chair for Ella before taking his own. "This meeting concerns my marriage. Therefore it concerns my wife. She's here." He then turned his attention to the patriarch of the other family, Mr. Beaumont. "I understand you feel your family has been disrespected," he began, his tone direct and unapologetic. "That was not my intention. However, my personal life is not a bargaining chip for a corporate merger. I am here today not to apologize, but to introduce you to my wife, Ella Prescott, and to discuss how our companies can move forward in a way that is mutually beneficial, based on business, not betrothal." The sheer audacity of his stance stunned the room into silence. Mr. Beaumont, a formidable man with a reputation for being ruthless, finally spoke. "And what does your wife have to say about any of this?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension, clearly expecting her to be a silent, decorative accessory. All eyes turned to Ella. This was her moment, her test. She could shrink under their collective glare, or she could rise. She took a quiet breath, feeling Brandon's steady, reassuring presence beside her. "Mr. Beaumont," she began, her voice calm and clear, betraying none of the nervousness she felt. "I understand that the proposed merger was tied to a real estate development project your company is heavily invested in, a project that requires significant zoning approvals and public support, which the Prescott name was meant to help secure." She had done her homework. Brandon had given her the files the night before, and she had devoured them, her architect's mind seeing patterns and possibilities others had missed. "The original plan has flaws," she continued, her confidence growing as she moved into her area of expertise. "It's financially sound, but lacks community integration. It's a fortress, not a neighborhood." She slid a tablet across the table, on which she had sketched a revised master plan. "I'm proposing an alternative, a mixed-use development that incorporates green spaces, affordable housing units alongside the luxury condos, and public access retail. It's a more sustainable, community-focused design that would not only be more likely to gain public support and fast-track approvals, but would also generate long-term goodwill for both the Beaumont and Prescott brands." She looked directly at Mr. Beaumont. "You don't need a marriage to get this project built. You need a better design." Silence. The lawyers shuffled their papers, stunned. Brandon's father stared at her, his expression of fury slowly morphing into one of grudging disbelief. "Mr. Beaumont looked from the brilliant, innovative designs on the tablet to the intelligent, confident young woman who had created them. She hadn't just deflected their anger. She had offered them a better solution. She hadn't just saved herself. She had saved them all from a bad deal. Brandon looked at her, and the pride, the admiration, the overwhelming love in his eyes was so potent, so undeniable. It was a brighter declaration than any shouted words. In the cold, sterile heart of his family's empire, she had proven she was not just his wife. She was his partner. The drive back to the penthouse was a triumphant, joyous blur. The moment the apartment door closed behind them, Ella let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated exhilaration. Brandon caught her as she spun around, lifting her off her feet and swinging her in a circle, their shared laughter echoing in the vast, sunlit room. "You were incredible," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist, his eyes shining with a pride that made her heart soar. "Absolutely incredible. You didn't just walk into the lion's den. You tamed the lions." "We did," she corrected him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "We tamed them. Together." "You're not just my wife, Ella," he said, his voice growing serious, his thumbs gently stroking her sides. "You're my partner, in every sense of the word. You're smarter, braver, and more talented than any of them, and I've never been prouder of anyone in my entire life." The intensity in his gaze, the raw sincerity of his words, made her feel seen in a way that was more profound than any victory in a boardroom. He saw all of her. The quiet girl from the cafe, the determined woman who had faced down her ex, and the brilliant designer who had just reshaped a multi-billion-dollar deal. "Ella," he said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone that made her breath catch. He took a step back, his hands falling from her waist, and the sudden distance felt wrong. "Our first wedding," he began, "was an act of rebellion. It was a strategy, a pact between two people who needed an escape." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "But I want our next one to be an act of love." Her own heart seemed to stop. Slowly, deliberately, he got down on one knee on the polished floor of his penthouse, the city skyline a glittering witness behind him. He looked up at her, his expression a mixture of love, hope, and a vulnerability she now knew was reserved only for her. "Ella Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came into my life by accident, and you've become the most essential part of it. You are my partner, my confidant, my very best friend. You make me better. You make me whole." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. It was not the simple band he had given her for their performance. He opened it. Inside, nestled against the dark fabric, was the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. A stunning, emerald-cut diamond, flanked by smaller sapphires that matched the deep, brilliant blue of his eyes. It was a ring that spoke not of contracts or convenience, but of a deep, abiding, and very real love. "Will you marry me, Ella?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "For real this time? Will you be my wife? Today, tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives?" Tears of pure, unadulterated joy blurred the glittering city skyline into a beautiful, watery kaleidoscope. Ella looked down at the incredible man kneeling before her, offering her not just a ring, but a future she had never dared to dream of. A future built not on convenience or strategy, but on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine partnership, and a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. "Yes," she breathed. The word, a quiet, heartfelt sigh of relief and happiness. A tear splashed onto her hand. "Yes, Brandon, of course, yes." A radiant smile broke across his face as he slid the breathtaking ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood, pulling her into a deep, all-encompassing kiss that was a promise, a celebration, and a homecoming all in one. Their second wedding was nothing like the first two. It wasn't in a sterile government office, nor was it a spectacle for a judgmental crowd. Months later, they stood on a secluded, sun-drenched beach at sunset, surrounded by a small handful of people who truly loved them. Ella's mother wept openly, her hand held tightly by Brandon's sister, Chloe, who had become one of Ella's closest friends. Even Brandon's parents were there, their expressions softened, not with reluctant acceptance, but with genuine warmth and pride as they watched their son marry the woman who had so clearly completed him. The vows they exchanged were not for show. They were deeply personal, filled with inside jokes about spilled coffee, shared pizzas on the floor, and the beautiful irony of their story. They promised not just to love and honor, but to always be each other's partner, defender, and greatest champion. Sometime later, as their new life settled into a happy, comfortable rhythm, a magazine article went viral online. It was a feature on power couples to watch, and it included a small, almost throwaway mention of Jack Thompson. His high-profile marriage to the Beaumont heiress, the article noted, had dissolved into a bitter, messy divorce in less than a year, plagued by infidelity and financial disputes. Ella scrolled past it on her tablet, a flicker of pity replacing any lingering animosity. She was in the light-filled living room of the home she had not only designed but was now helping to build, a new architectural firm she had co-founded with Brandon's backing already making waves. She looked across the room at her husband. He was on the floor, laughing as he tried to assemble a ridiculously complicated piece of baby furniture, the instructions spread out around him like a failed military map. The sight of him, the brilliant, powerful Brandon Prescott, utterly defeated by a crib, filled her with a love so deep and so vast it almost overwhelmed her. His ultimate humiliation of Jack wasn't the spectacle at the wedding. It was this quiet, simple, profoundly happy life he had built with her. She walked over and knelt beside him, handing him the screw he had been looking for. He looked up at her, his eyes full of a love that was as steady and reliable as the sunrise. "I love you, Mrs. Prescott," he said, his voice full of a contentment he had never known before. "I love you too," she replied, leaning in to kiss him. Their story had started with a spilled coffee and a crazy, desperate pact. It had been a rebellion, a performance, a game. But it had ended here, in a home she had designed, with a future they were building together, a testament to the beautiful, undeniable truth that sometimes the most real and lasting love begins with the most unbelievable of lies.